students of class 10 CBSE. I am here with the first lesson of the book Footprints Without Feet, the first lesson. And what is the first lesson? A triumph of surgery. Yes, you have rightly heard, a triumph of surgery. Students, I would like to ask you, what kind of life are you leading right now? When there is a lockdown all over the country, what kind of life are you leading? This lockdown has been imposed on us and we are willingly obeying it. The question is, what kind of life are we leading? Is it an active life, physically active life, or a sedentary life? Yes, we are doing something at home, some household chores and all kinds of things. But when we lead a sedentary life, a life without physical activity, what happens? Our health suffers. Mostly we remain indoors and we have little physical activity. These days, students do a very little physical activity. Our life is not regulated. In order to be fit, we need to have a regular life, a regulated life, proper rest, work, and proper food at the right time and exercise at the right time. When this rhythm is broken, when we stop doing physical work, we fall ill. We humans as well as animals. And this is also true of pets that we keep. Mostly they remain indoors and they do hardly any physical activity. Sometimes they are taken out for a walk and thereafter it is all over for them. All day they rest and they get good food, healthy food, or sometimes harmful food, but with very little physical activity. Mostly we pamper our pets. We overfeed our pets, and the result is that we have to take them to doctors for treatment and for checkup. What about these street dogs? Who cares for them? These street dogs, they get little food, but because they struggle for food, because they have to compete with others for food and other things, they become strong and they are always physically active. But when pets get easy food, comfortable life, and they give up their natural life, physical activities, what happens? What is the end result? The result is they fall sick. Here is a story, the story of a dog. Actually, his mistress pampers him, overfeeds him, and as a result, the dog becomes ill. Dog becomes overweight. It has extra fat, and he is unable to digest food properly. The narrator of the story is a surgeon. He is a veterinary surgeon. Means a surgeon who looks after animals or who treats animals. The mistress of the dog, the name of the dog is Tricky. Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady and she had a pet called Tricky. She loved her pet very well and she was so fond of him that she overfed him, pampered him. Whatever the dog wanted, she gave him. And the dog was greedy. He ate and ate and ate and did no physical activity. Was a lazy dog. He ate food which he was unable to digest. One day, Mrs. Pumphrey was with Tricky. She was on a walk with him. The narrator of the story, Mr. James Herriot, was driving his car and he spotted them. He stopped his car and came out and saw the dog. He felt the condition of the dog was not good. He was in bad shape. The dog looked overweight with extra fat and dog was walking with a lot of difficulty. His eyes were bloodshot and watery, rheumy eyes. And with bowed head, the dog was walking and he was struggling with his walk. Mrs. Pumphrey understood everything. She understood that the doctor was concerned. In this story, the doctor and the narrator is the same person, James Herriot. So she started explaining things. Actually, she expressed her views in this way. She wanted to say that her dog was suffering from malnutrition. Her dog was suffering from malnutrition. That's why he was so listless. He was so lethargic and idle. Actually, dog needed some extras, some good food to build up his health. So she said that she gave him malt, cod liver oil, Horlicks between the meals to build up his health. But the doctor thought otherwise. He was of different opinion. After all, he was a doctor. Then he asked one question to her. Mrs. Pumphrey, have you cut down on the sweet things that you were giving to him? She said, yes, for 1 or 2 days. Doctor, I did not give him any sweet thing to eat, though my dog loves cream cakes and chocolates. But again, my heart melted. I could not stop myself because my dog loved those things. So I started giving him. Then he asked her about the exercise. Are you giving him any exercise? She replied, only walk once a day. The doctor realized that there was going to be a trouble for Mrs. Pumphrey. The dog was going to be really sick. So he was very strict and severe. He told her, Mrs. Pumphrey, if you don't cut down his food, your dog is going to be really ill and seriously ill. She promised that she would try to put into practice his advice. But the doctor knew very well the nature of Mrs. Pumphrey. She always pampered her dog. Pampering means giving too much to one's child. So he knew very well that she pampered her dog and she would not stop giving him food. She would never cut down his food, and his health will further fall, deteriorate, and he would become seriously ill. Dog's condition was already very bad. He was concerned. He went back to his place, but he feared that sooner or later Mrs. Pumphrey would make a call to him to collect the dog, because dog would be seriously ill, because he knew the nature of Mrs. Pumphrey. She was overindulgent. She indulged Tricky a lot. She gave everything that the dog wanted, and dog was greedy and foodie. It wanted only food, food and food. And she gave him food, food and food, without stopping herself and without stopping her dog. Phone call came, and the dog was seriously ill. Tricky was seriously ill. The doctor came, Dr. James Harriet came. He saw the condition of the dog. He had stopped eating. The same dog who was fond of food, who ate all day, had stopped eating, and he vomited a lot. He was lying on the rug and panting, gasping for breath, and dog's condition was very bad. He was panting, lying on the rug. The doctor thought that he must take Tricky to his place. Otherwise, Mrs. Pumphrey would feed him to death. So he decided to take the dog to his clinic, to his place, without any delay. But Mrs. Pumphrey complained, Doctor, I love that dog so much, and that dog is so much attached to me. He would die in my absence. He would pine for me and die. The narrator told him strictly that if you really want to save his life, let me take him away. And I will keep him under observation. I will keep him under observation, and I will see what I can do. You know, that dog had a life of a prince. He had different kinds of coats. Winter coat, rain coat, summer coat, cushions, toys. He had different pots. A ball for breakfast, a ball for lunch, a ball for supper, and thousand things he had. He had different kinds of beds. All the things were put inside the car. So much so that James Herriot realized that car did not have any space for more things. And Mrs. Pumphrey, as he started driving his car, because his car could not hold more things, she threw armful of Tricky's coats into the car, and everybody was in tears. Mrs. Pumphrey and all her staff members, and he could see in the mirror of the car that everybody was crying because Tricky was going away. It was a pathetic scene. The dog was beside Mr. Herriot, and he told the dog, "Tricky, I can see there is nothing in you, not a kick in you. I mean, there is no strength in you. But my dear boy, I know what is cure for you. I will cure you." He reached there. All the dogs surrounded Tricky. But Tricky was almost lifeless because he was seriously ill. They smelt at him and ran away to play. For the first 2 days, he did not give him anything to eat, only supplied him plenty of water, no food. And his health started showing the sign of recovery. At the end of 2 days, he started showing some interest in the surroundings. He looked around and he felt some energy in his body. On the third day, when the other dogs barked, Tricky would whimper. Whimper means produced a low moaning sound, complaining sound. This means he also wanted to play, but there was still no energy in his body. When the meal time came, all the dogs ran for the meal. They fought among themselves, and they knew that if they got late in reaching their bowls, then there will be real struggle for food. And Tricky was watching all this. It was for the first time he had found a natural surroundings where he had to compete with other dogs. At Mrs. Pumphrey's house, he did not have to struggle for anything. Life was so easy. That's why he fell sick. Here, life was real challenge. And he was observing all this, and Mr. James Herriot thought that in this way, Tricky will be stirred, he will be roused, he will be physically active, and his health would improve. Because he will have to struggle for food, he will have to compete with other dogs for food. Tricky watched all this, how the dogs ran for food. And thereafter, actually till that date, the narrator had not placed a separate bowl for him. So when the dogs had finished their meal, Tricky moved around the bowls and licked some of them, and the narrator felt that he was feeling hungry. So next day a separate bowl was placed for Tricky, and he ran for his food as he had never run in his life. And now his life was different. He was running with the dogs, fighting with the dogs. He was a proper pet dog. Others were rough dogs with thick and long hair, fur. And he was fighting with them, running with them. He was never so happy in his life. He was enjoying himself. He was enjoying their games, their fight, running over each other and moving around, running around. Tricky was very happy. For the first time, he was enjoying himself. But Mrs. Pumphrey was not quiet. She would come from time to time, and she hovered in the background and watched Tricky from some distance, hiding herself. But still she was not convinced. James Herriot told her that the dog is improving and he would soon recover completely. And Mrs. Pumphrey would make dozen phone calls during the day. But when she asked about the change of his clothes, about his beds and coats, James Herriot dodged this question. Because he was not going to pamper the dog. He was giving him the real training of life, where life is natural and you have to compete for everything. Mrs. Pumphrey thought that as the dog was recovering from his illness, she started sending eggs and wines. But Mr. James Herriot had no desire to give all these things to Tricky, because he had kept him on strict dieting. He knew that the dog was foodie, and if the dog was given less food, his health would improve. And Tricky had improved by leaps and bounds. His muscles were hard and he was running very fast, and he had lost a lot of fat. He was looking slim and trim and healthy dog. So Tricky looked fit as a fiddle. So Tricky had completely recovered, but still Mrs. Pumphrey sent in eggs and wine, but James Herriot did not give anything to him. He and his partners consumed all those things and they had a very happy time. Actually, the idea came to him, why not keep Tricky as a permanent guest, as because of him he was getting eggs and wines and all kinds of things. So he wanted to keep him on as a permanent guest, but he knew that Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering and he could not delay Tricky's return to Mrs. Pumphrey long. So he informed her that she could come and collect her dog. Within minutes she came in her large car, and when he carried Tricky to her, he jumped into her arms and started leaking and barking, and she was in tears, Mrs. Pumphrey, because she had got back her child, her darling, her loving dog. She was so happy, and as she moved away, she cried out from her car. She was in tears. "Oh, Mr. James Herriot, this is a triumph of surgery. This is a triumph of surgery." Students, you know very well that he had not carried out any surgery on Tricky. He had not given any medicine to Tricky. It was just a regulated life that he had given him, a natural life he had provided to him. He lived with other dogs and learned the biggest lesson in life, that food is not always easy. You have to struggle for food, you have to fight for food. And in this way, Tricky had learned the big lesson of life, that life is not always easy. In order to keep fit, you have to have a regulated life and natural life, and you have to compete with others for your food and other things. In this way, Tricky got well, and Mrs. Pumphrey called it a triumph of surgery. In this way, students, Tricky got well and doctor did not give him any medicine. No surgery was performed on him. So students, I'm sure you have understood everything. And if you have any doubts, write in the comment section your questions. Subscribe to my channel. Have a fantastic day.